Morning, everybody. I'm Wayne. This is my partner in crime, Wayne, and we're here to talk about Wayne's World of Winds, and it's actually your world of winds. What I would like to say, especially those of you that have already been active this past year, was unbelievable what you did to get us through the pandemic, but to get us through, not just get us through the 2022 season, but in a fantastic way. It was unbelievable what you put on the floor, and my hat is off to you. And with that being said, I'm going to turn it over to Wayne.
Thanks so much, Wayne. And thanks for being here, folks. Again, we're so excited about the division and so excited of the direction it's moving in. And we're so excited that there's some new people here that are going to continue to move it forward. We've had a terrific amount of people inquiring about the activity, including our judges list, which has grown. The waiting list of people that want to judge your groups is really impressive, and a substantial growth in that this year. So I'm excited about that. You'll see in a couple of minutes, I'm going to show you some of the new sheets that we are put together. We actually were able to trial them last year at championships, so we can talk a little bit about that. And the judge's perspective on that, and that's going to be a big part of our training session. So when I get into that, I'll touch on that a little bit. But that's exciting for us as we move into this year as well. Okay, so let's get rolling here. So again, this is going to pertain mostly to the folks that are looking to start up a group, but it might be interesting to touch on some of this, or even if you have an established group. The things you have to consider, obviously, is the program size, and this is a beautiful activity that, we have groups that maybe have an outside marching group. They're not necessarily a huge group. Perfect venue, perfect size for an indoor winds team. So, I know those are things that you consider, but it's a terrific opportunity to bring any kind of group in, regardless of instrumentation, and we see that, and that's one of the cool things that sets it apart. It's whatever your group is, right? And that could change. I'm sure we see that with the groups. Like the instrumentation and the approach to it changes from year to year. Obviously, facilities is a huge part. And the working with your administration, the working with your athletic director and other people that will share that space. And that's something that you're going to have to continue to negotiate and make that happen. I know some of the groups like down in Florida have the ability to kind of go outside and do their thing, on the West Coast a little bit as well. You might not have that if you're living in a colder climate. So those are things to work out for sure, but definitely have that on your agenda to meet with those people and communicate with those people so we can all kind of exist well. If you have, how many have the folks that are established have another established group? By that, percussion or color guard that might be happening. Can you see of hands? All right. Now for the folks that are just starting, this doesn't quite pertain to you, and I'll get to the independent thing in a second, but that could be beneficial as far as using maybe a tarp that had been used prior. Right, whether it be percussion or whether it been, if you're just kind of getting started and you're going, boy, there's a lot of stuff to get here, right? Especially if you're starting and you're starting with a kind of a beginner group, which is great. And I think a lot of the groups that start there, and this is amazing, and that's the lifeblood of what we're doing here. So if you can utilize some of that equipment, there's nothing wrong with wearing a t-shirt and jeans for your first year. Don't have that feeling like you have to go and invest a ton of money and ask for a ton of money from your administrators at school, because it might not be there. So work with that. And again, that's why I referenced the folks that are on tomorrow. They're going to talk about maybe some funding ideas and how they do that with dues and things like that. Equipment. Obviously, if you have a marching band that's established, you're going to be able to pretty much utilize that equipment, and that's what we do. Maybe kids. Does anyone have the situation where the kids are renting instruments? Not any of that? Okay, a little bit of that. But I would imagine it's going to be used from another part of your program, which is, and that includes electronic. That includes your speaker system from your marching band or whatever, your other indoor programs. So again, if you can work that out with your other teams, that would be definitely beneficial for you. Instructional staff, I would think the same things, but not necessarily, right? How many, just show of hands, the people that are established have the people that do your other seasons are also coming in to do the winter. Is that accurate? Anyone not have that as a situation? Okay, so again, it can be a bit of a challenge, right? If you're doing like every season, you don't get that break where we used to maybe just do the thing that we do indoor, and you're still going to be doing that with your symphonic bands and your jazz bands and whatever. So you have this additional thing. So maybe in some cases you have to look at the timing and the scheduling with your facilities and keep that thing fresh and keep those people involved. And finally, as I mentioned, the budget situation, specifically if it's in a school situation, that's going to be a new thing, right? That's going to be a new piece of budgeting that like your fine arts supervisor or principal might need to be aware of for the new folks that are starting. So definitely get on that. You've probably already started that process and work with them. And you're going to know from this first year whether it was sufficient or whether maybe that's something, and administrators, they like numbers. They know that. They make ratios and they break it down per kid, just like you would in a classroom setting, about how much money is allotted. So once you kind of know what's going, and as the thing grows, that's something that you could take back to them and just say, number-wise, here's where we're at, here's what we're projecting. Could we, for next year, could we look at this? This worked. How about some uniforms for next year? How about we'd like to upgrade the sound system and that type of thing, right? So those are all things to maybe consider, especially for the folks that are just getting started. How does it benefit your program? Like, I'm talking your whole program. How does having a Winds group help your program? And we've talked to some of you, and we've talked to some of the folks that aren't here. We had a session with Matt Harloff with Avon, and we asked him specifically, how does it help your program? Matt, so some of these are directly from him, some are from other people. And I think the one thing that we want to dispel with anyone that you're talking to is say, hey, what is this Winds thing about? Tell me about it. Is that it replaces something. Right? There was that feeling like it somehow replaces concert band, symphonic band, jazz band. Absolutely not. It might enhance that. Why does it enhance it? Because the fundamentals that you teach, whether they be fundamentals of movement, fundamentals of playing, those are reinforced, right? So the first one is Matt's, top left. The kids just get on their instruments more than they wouldn't. So you're still having your concert band, your jazz band, symphonic band, and they have this reinforcing techniques, more opportunity to play music, okay? Greater performance readiness. Does anyone not want that? Right? And the folks that I've spoken to said that their kids, as they get into their region opportunities or their concert settings or their festivals, are more ready to play, right? We had some great success from groups last year, right? So terrific performances. If you all don't know, UTRGV, the group from Texas, was invited to play at TMEA. TMEA. The same kids in the gym are going to TMEA. Are you kidding? That's something to celebrate. That's a wonderful achievement, right? Greater confidence. Again, the kids more time getting ready to perform. And the one I like is the part, we all know kids, they just want to hang, right? They want to do this thing, like they like to come together and have the whole experience. They want to perform, but they like to hang. They want to be in the gym, they want to be in the band room, they want to go on the bus rides. So that part's huge as far as developing teamsmanship and the feeling of togetherness, and who doesn't want that, right? So I think all of those things are great reasons why we do this, and the fact that it's going to enhance the rest of your program. All right, we talked about some of these sheets, and I'm going to just go through just quickly with you. As I mentioned, we were able to have these written with the steering committee. Some folks are here from that committee along with the administrators. And it's a collaborative thing. So it wasn't like Wayne and I in a room like making this stuff up. This was very much like out with a committee that kind of created what we wanted to do with these sheets. The biggest difference, I think, with the sheets from prior years, it's actually pared down nicely. It kind of gets to the nuts and the bolts, right? And I think that was probably our main goal in trying to put these sheets together, is give clarity to the judges, and not necessarily have like a huge dissertation on the sheet, and just pare it down to what you want to be talking about as an adjudicator. So you can see that illustrated. The numbers are still the same. You still have the what and the how on either side of the sheet, and you know, we spent quite a bit of time with the judge training, as we'll do again this year, in how to address that, especially on this sheet, right? You'll know someone will come in maybe with the visual background or have the music background, but the goal maybe is to not know what background they have. Does that make sense to you? Is to kind of get, as you present and you design the shows, there's things that you're designing that you want the judge to hear or see, right? And as you present that, the judge should react to that, whether it be a visual or a musical element, right? And creating effect. So that's the effect sheet. And I think the manuals, if they're not out, they're ready to go, if I'm not mistaken. Does anyone have them yet? I don't think they've sent them yet, but they are ready. They are ready. You can imagine that type of thing, and have to, like Ron said, so many, is this right? Is this the one? And you know, you'll see that little blurb right at the top here. I don't know if you can read it. The thing's a little blurry. I'll read you what it says. That's one of the things that's new here. It says, criteria reference descriptors should have equal consideration and are not presented in any order of importance. So all those bullets, it doesn't mean like there's a hierarchy, like the one at the top's worth more than the one at the bottom. They're all the same. And when you get your manuals, you'll be able to see that. Let's look at the next one. This is the music analysis sheet. I was part of this one in the working of this, and we are going to something new that we just talked about doing with the steering committee, is actually putting together a support paper. So if you don't know what that means, like a paper that the judge will get that will explain the sheet in more detail that you see here. Let's look at orchestration for a sec. What are the elements of orchestration? Well, we're going to have those. So the judge will have those. We're going to talk about all of the parts of orchestration that the judge can talk about, and then you can speak with the judge as well. And we can see that the orchestration is broken into like subheadings. So that's something worth talking about. So really it'll be like elements of design, and we'll break that down. Again, you can see the compositions, okay, the what part on the left, and then obviously the performance quality issues on the right-hand side. And you can see it's about clarity, right? It's not like a really extended idea, although the support paper will get into that. Simultaneous responsibility, that's new, right? That's a new thing on the sheets. We're going to train the judges about that. And so you all will get up to speed with that as well. And you do that in your design now, and that's something that you'll expect to hear from the judge. They'll talk about that. Let's go to the next one. This is the visual analysis. They're very similar sheets, right? If you put them side by side, there's a similarity. So similar, the support paper for visual analysis will have the elements of design. Line, flow, space, speed, right? All of that stuff. So the judges will have that, and I don't see why we couldn't maybe make that available so you would see what it is. We try to have as much transparency in this process as we can. That's why when we do things like this, we do the training, we'll bring in the folks on the committee as well that helps to design it.
So,
yeah.
If I may ask, the support sheet is not necessarily trying to pen the judge in, it's to give them clarity as to what these descriptors are.
Yes.
So that they may speak more.
Absolutely.
On those points.
Yes. For the folks that are new, we created a sheet last year, if you remember, which were descriptors for the judge. Options of verbiage that pertain to the different scoring areas. And again, it's just opportunities so they don't get locked into maybe using one term or that type of thing. And the support paper would be very similar. Like, you know, are you talking about these elements? Oh, I don't talk enough about texture, right? Although there's texture everywhere, visually and musically. I need to do that.
And there is
Yeah.
a backside.
Yes, there's a backside. I didn't put it up here for this purpose, but
Are they, is this year, I think I was, with the general effect, are they doing 2 captions, music and visual?
no, it'll still be overall.
So just give me 3 judging panels?
Yes.
All right, all right.
That kind of came up, the 4th thing came up, it didn't go through this year, but I have a feeling it was close.
Let me
what I
explain
hear.
that, because I sit in on the board of directors, because everything Winds Advisory Board goes to the board of directors to get approved. And there was a surprising amount of support at the board of directors for that. And we kind of said, yes, if we're going to do that, go to 4 judges, if we can make it happen. Well, that meeting was July 7th or 8th or something like that. And when Ron and I started talking, we realized that is too late to turn it over to the local circuits, because they follow the same thing. For them to all of a sudden have to do 4 judges, and it would have been a little bit late for us to take, because we'd have to get a lot more judges. So that is still positively floating out there. And if it's going to happen for the following year, we'll have to make it happen before the Winds Advisory Board, because that's June. So just to bring you up to date on where that was.
So we are the 1 GE judge. Right.
Yeah, and that might be, as Wayne mentioned, that might be something down the road that happens. It obviously happens over on the other side, but for now we're going to go with the overall, and we'll do our absolute best to continue to train the judges to have that focus of hearing and seeing the show. Steve?
Well, and to clarify, it was never about splitting and writing 2 sheets. It was about having 2 judges judge overall effect.
Yeah.
One judge that comes from a music background, and one that comes from a visual background, judging the same sheet. So that way you would get 2 different perspectives that would then be averaged together to make the 40% of the scoring system. So even at some point, if it does go through, the intent is not to write 2 separate sheets that handle the 2 elements, because one of the hallmarks of what we do in Winds is this idea of coordinated effect between music and visual, and they would still talk about both sides of the sheet, both music and visual. They would still talk about both, but there would be 2 judges that have 2 different areas of historical judging focus.
Yeah. So it would bleed over a little bit on each as a...
Should bleed a lot.
Yeah. No, it would bleed. Okay.
Yeah, we're going to encourage the judges, because everyone has their comfort zone, and I try to encourage them to go out. Don't go to the point where you don't know what you're talking about, but certainly you have to be a student of it. You have to study, you have to kind of want to get into that other area, and so we're working on that. The other thing with that is we were able to bring in 3 new judges this year, and every one of them has the ability to judge any caption. And I purposely looked for those people. They could, I would be comfortable on overall effect, visual analysis, music analysis. In fact, we have one situation this year where one judge is doing essentially visual analysis, but will do music analysis at one show. And I think that's what we're looking for, right? You're creating one program that you would like it to, and granted, we get into our specific things, but that's a good thing to have.
And I should say too, we discussed this at the advisory board, but all of you perhaps were not there, is that we have tried from the beginning, from the first year, that those overall effect judges were all band directors or previous band directors who were visual judges in the marching band season. So they had a good balance of that. And the only exception to that was one band director who had a tremendous visual program at the national level. And so it's a hard caption to judge. So we continue to
The last
work
thing
on that.
I'll mention is, and related to that, is at some shows, if we don't have a huge showing of groups, as you know, the percussion folks will get involved. You have my personal word that I will work with those folks this year, whether it's the support papers or whether it's a Zoom call with those percussion judges that are judging your groups at regional shows, and we're going to try to make that happen as best we can, because that's important. 10 years from now, maybe that we're not even having that discussion, right? Okay, so I'm just about turning it over. So this is our contact information. We're going to have some questions and answers at the end. That's why I'm kind of moving quickly, because I know Wayne has some great stuff here to share with you. So if you want to just take a picture of that or just copy that down quickly. I think also on the QR outside by the door, all our slides are there, and that information is there as well if you want to grab that. So thank you for coming. I'm looking forward to seeing your groups, and let's keep up the great work. Wayne's World.
Okay, we're up and running. So that was my biggest worry of the whole day, is switching computers. So I'm going to do two parts here. The first part is going to be a brief history, where we started, where we are today and beyond. And at the end, I put together a 6-minute video collage of all the gold medal awards at this year's, one from each class, and it's pretty fascinating to see 40, 50 seconds of one flowing into the other. And then the second half, the other part of my presentation, I'm going to talk about backing tracks, soundtracks, because that's always a concern, always a big discussion item, and I try to grab as much information on that as I could with a little help from my friends. All right, so how did we start in 2014? 2015 was our official first year of competitive activities. In 2014, there were some demonstration groups. Most notably, Amachi came over from Japan, performed at percussion championships and a couple of other venues. I better stay here. That's Amachi down there. The upper right-hand corner was Alter High School, which is in the Dayton area, small band. And kind of blurry down the bottom, but some of you maybe remember North Glen did a presentation. They were all very different. North Glen was like Broadway, and it was really, really fascinating. And that led us to our inaugural season. And I've just got a bunch of data that I think is interesting. I hope you do. And I'll go through these real quickly. We had 34 groups in total participation, 20 groups at the first World Championships, and I was excited that we had that many. And of course, as you know, we were on the same weekend as percussion, as we have been, and that worked pretty great. Variety was good. Simple costumes and themes, and we had anywhere from 10 to 40 members, and we were involved in eight regionals. Here are a couple of pictures. One that I like in the upper right-hand corner is Zach from LSM Winds, which was called something else at the time, Lake Shoreman. And let's tell a story. First of all, my hat goes off to Zach. He is the most tenacious director we have had from the beginning to where they started to where we wound up today. And he was in the group, and I know they had all kinds of organizational challenges that first season, but the very first Winds show was the Dayton Regional, I'm pretty sure, and they were the very first group in WGI Winds to take the floor. And we only had a couple groups there, so the percussion panel was judging the Winds groups, and I was sitting up there with them, and they were the first group that came out, and they were in these uniforms, and Wayne had talked about how we had simplicity, and that really worked great. But they came out there, got set up, about 10 or 11 members. What'd you have? 10 members, which is minimum. Good thing. And they stood and played their whole show. And I remember about 3 minutes into the show, I was looking at the percussion judge was doing it, and the visual judge looked at me, and he went, "What do I do?" But from that point to being tenacious, working with the group, and growing it to being a gold medalist. So that's pretty incredible. The bottom right-hand corner is Greenfield Central. And Chris Wing tells a story that he wasn't really too into it when it started, didn't think he should really do it. But they had found out about it, the kids had found out about it, so he said, well, I'll put up a sign-up sheet, you know, and maybe a couple kids will sign up. He put up the sign-up sheet, and by the end of the day, there were 40 kids signed up. So they went ahead and did their thing. Flannel pajama pants, and kind of a tour shirt on the top. This was a group from Pecos, Texas. And who was the group on the top? I can't remember, on the left.
Is that Strike?
Strike, that's right. Second season jumped all the way to 48 groups total, 33 groups from 20 the first year in championships, and that was the crowd, which I was really impressed with, and that was fantastic for our kids to be out there performing. Choreography became more a part of what we were doing. There's some of the groups, and Amachi came back that year in world class, and Avon's up there. This may be Strike again, I'm not sure. But actually these angles just kind of show how the choreography and body moves were becoming more important. Third season, 53 groups, 35 groups of championships, so that wasn't a great big jump. I'm not sure why. 15 regionals, and it took about 3 years, I felt, for the characteristics of what each class means started to fall into place. What is A class? What does it mean? What is open class? What is world class? And people would ask us those first years, well, what does it mean to be an A class? Can you tell me exactly what the skills were? And we would always say, you're deciding that. We're not going to tell you what they are, you're deciding that. And it kind of took us 3 years for it to kind of lock in. And each year it becomes a little bit more defined, perhaps. More colorful costumes. The upper right-hand group was the bird show from down the road. Central Lafourche. 2018 season continued to grow, so that was good growth going from there. By that year, that bottom little phrase there, it had gotten to the point where it was 2-to-1 Scholastic Independent. And I thought that was interesting. Kind of shows actually the strength of the independent groups. And just a few more pictures from those groups, and I know they're hard to see where you are. And we were continuing to get more representation from different places in the country. That's Azle, Texas, up on the right hand, doing the Barber of Seville special WGI event, half off. And just more and more interest and variety in the shows. 2019, again, didn't have as much of a growth that year as we did from the previous. There was more independent interest. And we were on a roll then. Those are some of the groups, colorful costumes that year. We were on a roll, and then 2020 hit us. We did get in 10 regionals, or parts of them, before we all shut down. And so the last 2 weeks of the season was canceled. The World Championships, as you know, was canceled. Sad, sad, sad. 2021, we were in a virtual season, and for those of you that got your groups to keep going somehow, and I know it was difficult, but to participate in that, we wanted to mostly have it be an encouragement to the groups to get some feedback. The steering committee was very involved with putting together the sheets and the rules and all that, and we were deeply indebted to them for making that happen. And I think that had something to do with the success we had this year in 2022. So a couple things from 2022, just go through these real quick. That shows how many total groups we had participating along the year. And in In 2022, 58 compared to 64. It's amazing that we were that close. And our percentage was a little bit better, I think. Across all the divisions, we kind of expected it to be about 20% down, and it was perhaps right around there, but we won the award. We were only 15% down. That shows a breakdown of the different classes. Interesting, from 2015 to 2022, from our inception, we had 185 different groups. We've got to find out where they all went and get some of them back. Actually, I know where a lot of them went was change of directors. And almost every time I'd inquire, so, well, sorry to see that you're not bringing a group out this year. Well, the director left. He went somewhere else, and that was the biggest thing. World Championships just kind of shows the up and down nature by comparison. We actually had more scholastic groups this year than we've ever had before, in spite of being off, but we definitely lost independent groups. And that makes sense because it was the hardest thing for them to keep and those guys are going to be talking about independent groups on their session tomorrow, but so we dropped down to only 9 groups, and I think some of them are coming back. And I know I've heard interest from several new independent groups that are coming out this season. Just a little quick regional participation. And speaking of that, you've seen that we have 4 Winds only shows for the first time, so we're real excited about that. We juggled a few of the shows. We dropped a couple of the shows that we thought would be in conflict, so people would tend to go there. And those who do have groups, I urge you to support those Winds only shows to make that happening. So 2022 and beyond, here's the collage I put together.
You may say I'm a dreamer, but I'm not the only one. We are all dreamers. We all seek to live life in greener pastures.
So before I talk about that, two things struck me. So all these years since we started, I felt like we were kind of the minor leagues to the percussion and color guard. And when prelims finished, I said to Wayne, I said, we have arrived. And the quality from A class to world class was just stunning. And I would say, secondly, that compared to our first year of competition, the A class gold medalists would have easily won open class. Open class gold medalists would easily have won world class compared to that first year. It's unbelievable. What I would like to see, more groups. And we're all working hard to make that happen. I would still like to see more variety of instrumentation, and Wayne talked about there is no set instrumentation, and I like that about our organization, our division. I don't want it to become a standard accepted instrumentation like you see in the marching band world, in drum corps, in concert band world. You know, I want to see a clarinet choir out there. We have had a couple of brass bands, especially the first year out of the drum corps activity. That's great. They can compete. You don't have to have woodwinds, and that is the case. I want to see a saxophone band. I keep saying that, with 40 saxophones out there, including bass sax. I think, and that's one of the things I love about the activity, is the class division, the tier system, that you don't have to compete against other groups at different levels. It's a place to meet the needs of all our groups. 2019, we had a WGI UK regional over there, and there are a couple of folks over there that are really big in the activity. Their local circuit is called IMG, Indoor Music Games, and great people. And Mark Thurston and I went over in December and did kind of workshops with their directors. We had our first regional over there, and they had on worse times during the pandemic and coming back. They were able to have one regional this past year, but they're ready to refire and come back strong, and I'm going to do a virtual clinic with them in October. But they're talking about brass bands, and kind of in the UK things are very different because there are no scholastic bands. There are no bands in the school, which is sad, and some people are trying to fix that. But the thing that's really big over there are brass bands. Some of you brass players may be aware of that. And the top brass bands are competitive, they're professional level. I mean, they're like our symphony orchestras. There are 1,400 brass bands in the UK, and almost all of them have youth groups. And so this IMG group is trying to work with some of those brass bands to say, do your brass band literature and what you do in your instrumentation, but put a little movement into that, staging and so forth. So we hope that's a new activity. And that's, again, another all instrumentation will work. So that's what we're working on. So now I'm going to talk about backing tracks. And this is a very interesting topic, lots of discussion. It's something that's really morphed into a really good thing from where we started. The first few years, I was not a big fan of backing tracks, so I'll go ahead and say it. But part of that had to do with they were done by a band in a box track on a boom box, and wasn't too impressive. But it's so professional now, and it works great, and I do love it. So here's some information. So why use a soundtrack? Lots of different reasons. Schools with an indoor percussion ensemble may not have enough students to play in both ensembles. It's a choice. They like that sound of the winds and a soundtrack. And I use the word soundtrack and backing track interchangeably here. It does give more focus on the winds, and that is the name of our group. You can utilize effects that you couldn't do otherwise. Sound effects, voiceovers, instrument sounds not available otherwise. Utilize other instrument sounds like strings, electric bass instruments, piano, sitar, and we had some of that. To simulate, kind of as an educational experience, to simulate the studio musician approach. And that happens in the real commercial world of music all the time. So what are the options? Winds and soundtrack, computer and amplification with the live winds. Winds with some percussion and soundtrack. And again, this is a variety of instrumentation. That's what's fascinating to me. I love that. Whereas you might have a drum set, or you might have any of these other things, electric bass, guitar, might have a few mallets, might have synthesizer. And again, some groups don't have any soundtrack. UTRGV did not, it was all live percussion. So what is the function? Number one is to provide the pulse, because although you can have a conductor, the activity is kind of morphed into, I didn't see any conductors this year. 2019, I saw a couple throughout the season, and you're allowed, and it's okay. It is a little distracting visually in such a close arena. So what is stylistically appropriate for the rhythmic accompaniment? And going back to that first year, it wasn't appropriate very much. Might be a drum set, might be symphonic types of percussion instruments. I use the word symphonic in quotes, from an orchestra or wind ensemble. What would the percussion section in your wind ensemble be playing? Might be, different ethnic styles of music, and you can get that authenticity. Might be rhythmic piano and guitar patterns. Accompaniment timbre is not present in the winds. So this, the pulse is number one. Two is to bring out these other kinds of sounds. Strings, synthesizer sounds, choir, ahs, and oohs. For those of you that have dabbled in synthesizers or arranging, that's one of the patches that you can get, the ahs or the oohs, and pretty much anything. So what are the challenges and solutions? The pulse has to be loud enough for the performers to hear it, but it can't be so loud that it becomes out of balance with the wind instruments. So what are the solutions? A variety of pulse sounds. Mix up the patterns, don't do the same thing. Might be drum set for a while, might turn into something else. Speaker placement, for the most part, the best thing the kids need to, I say kids, I'm old so I can say that, even of the 25-year-olds and the 35-year-olds, they need to hear the pulse, so it's got to be behind them. But a couple of groups have experimented successfully with having front monitors facing the performers, and they have just the kind of the pulse. You can switch it out. You don't have all the sounds coming through there. It can just be the pulse, and that's been fairly successful. Clarity of the wind instrument lines is most important, and we were getting there in 2019, but up to that point, the biggest criticism, if you will, from the judging community was it's too loud. The accompaniment track is too loud. We can't hear the winds. So we're finally getting the clarity in that based on some of the previous things. But here's the thing. Texture, is it thin or thick? Is the wind writing thin or thick? If the wind writing is thin, the accompaniment can be a little thicker. Tessitura, and this is one thing Wayne and I have talked about a lot. It's so funny saying Wayne and I, it's really weird. And that if a segment of the music is high wind sounds predominantly, it needs to be a low track sound. Too often they wind up being the same. If it's a low winds, it needs to be a high track. Might be just a hi-hat, and that'll cut through. But too often, for example, it's a low wind section or mid voices and lows, and the accompaniment is in the same range. It makes for muddiness. Do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, it's you think in orchestration, you're trying to match, think of the track as just another color, right? And if you're writing, you'll know that if you have too much of that color, that frequency, it'll cancel each other out. And especially in an indoor environment, it just creates mud, and then the opposite of what you're trying to go for. So even octaves, like when you're experimenting with a low sound, don't get exactly where the tubas or barysax are. You want to experiment with going beyond lower than that. Or I know Wayne talks about how you EQ the sounds, right? In certain settings, in certain environments, you would think, oh, we need more bass in it. You might need less bass and maybe more, mid-range sound. So those are things you can experiment with that you probably wouldn't have to in a concert hall situation, but because of where we play, you might need to experiment with some of that.
And I'm by no means a sound engineer, but one thing I tell at regionals in a critique a lot too, especially if it's an electric bass or a synthesized kind of bass, is you need to put a lot of treble in the electric bass. Actually, I tell jazz ensembles the same thing. If you stand in front of an electric bass speaker, it should not sound good. It should sound too trebly. But you get out, even in an auditorium, and it sounds just right. Because if you start with it sounding like an electric bass, it's so boomy. And I tell the groups that, our high school gym that you just performed in, that's a giant subwoofer. So.
I don't know if you've ever experienced it. I remember as a kid, like sometimes I'd be in the showers and I would sing, and that would be that one note that would just fill up the room because it just happened to be match the acoustic setting that you're in. You didn't have to sing it any louder. It would just be this huge note. We all have those in your show, right? So you have to be really careful, and it's hard to tell where those notes are going to be. But there are certain frequencies that will just blow up on you, and I'm sure when you sit up, you go, "Oh man, what was that?" Right? And it's that kind of thing, that just the acoustic environment and the frequencies that you're playing and the ranges and tessitura will create those moments.
So, continuing challenge and solutions, who is designing the backing track? Sometimes it's a wind arranger and a separate track designer, just like you might have in marching band where you had somebody arrange the winds, somebody did the percussion. The track designer can do their work from the wind arrangement. Obviously the wind arrangement has to come first. They need to work together. In some of the groups, maybe this is the best solution, the arranger is knowledgeable in both those things. And right from the beginning, just like doing a Sibelius or a Finale score, the backing tracks are right there. And so I was able to get some of these samples to show you there are differences in A-class, open class, world class, and mostly in complexity of what they're doing. Nick Riley helped us with this first one, and Drew Brown with Kent City Winds that Steve works with. So it's a little hard for you to see, I know, but you can tell the complexity of what's going on in the wind score up there. So this is Only Want to Be With You. That's their opener. This is the backing track without the winds. Okay, kind of a rock style patterns, then it changes as the winds, and then it almost drops out. You'll hear it when we put the whole thing together. Voice added. Okay, now this is with the tracks. That was supposed to keep going. And so that gives you an idea. That's an A class. Here's LS winds. This is the backing track with winds. And I don't know if it'll work here. At home it worked when I changed pages. It kept playing the music, but of course that didn't happen now. Zach, you want to say anything about this?
It was just a great time. Our show is about being in a video game, so we have to use a bunch of sounds that you wouldn't find in a symphonic band setting, and we have to play a lot of stuff that was just loads of fun.
So whereas the previous one was kind of like a rhythm section, a rock rhythm section, this is more like studio kinds of stuff and effects. This is pre-show, right?
Yeah, and announcement.
And the announcement.
Presenting their show in the game, WGI Sport of the Arts is proud to present LSM Winds.
I've got it on a separate track here. There. end of the first part. So just kind of a much more sophisticated, pretty cool sounds. Okay, I got to move fast because we're just about out of time. This is from 2019, the Beatles show that Rhythm X Winds did. This is without. Now this, by the nature of this song, is very quarter note oriented for a while, but then you notice how it breaks down and changes after that. There you go. And the baritone solo. Bass line playing the melody. And now fuller texture in the winds. Fairly simple in the accompaniment though. Okay, with the winds. This is the last thing we're going to do. Now 3, 4. So you can get the idea there. Okay, so we ran out of time. I talked too long, as I always do. So we'll be happy to chat with you if you have any comments, questions, and thank you so much. Best of luck. If you'd like more information, this is if I do say so myself or my kid, there's a really good marching arts education podcast that gets into the nitty-gritty a whole lot. That's very helpful. And there's some other resources out there. I couldn't find any. If you know any good resources, videos or articles or whatever, let me know and I'll add them to my collection. Thanks.